Hello students, welcome to Manifested e-learning platform. My name is Wilson Andove. I'm your literature teacher. Now students, we have been looking at narratives and we have so far defined what a narrative is. We said a narrative is an account of human life which can either be fictional or factual. We have also looked at the various types of narratives and we said the types of narratives. We talked about myth, etiology, legends, trickster, human, fables, ogre or monster, spirit or ghost narrative. Then finally you have dilemma. So students, we have so far mentioned these types of narratives and defined each one of them and its characteristics. We have also looked at the narrative techniques, in this case features of narratives, and key among them is the song. We talked about use of the song, use of the formula. So you have the narrative techniques. Or devices. By this we mean those features which are typical, which are unique of narratives. And we have four key major features. One is the use of the formula. And I said you have the opening formula and the closing formula. So you have opening and closing formula. Opening will start a narrative and closing will end a narrative. We also talked about the use of the song. We have talked about fantasy. We have talked about setting. And lastly, characters. Animal characters. In this case, animal characters. So students, these are the major narrative techniques. We have many more which I explained in the previous lesson. So today, students, we're going to look at when you are performing a narrative, which are these features that one employs. And then after that, we shall look at samples of these narratives, starting with the myth. So we shall begin by looking at performance features of narratives. Now we have said a narrative is a story, and for one to enjoy the fullness of that story, you have to experience a performance. That means there's someone who is telling a story. We call this person a narrator. So as a student, we need to have an experience with this person telling a story. So when this person is telling a story, he's going to employ some features. We call those performance features. The first feature is called mimicry. Mimicry. The word mimicry means to imitate. When you mimic someone or something, you are imitating that person. Now, in a story, the narrator might actually imitate the character, the mannerisms of a certain character. So in this case, we are saying the narrator, and narrator means the person telling the story will imitate the mannerisms and even words of a character. For example, if the character is limping, you might see the narrator on stage again trying to limp, showing that motion that is also limping. So when a character imitates the mannerisms, when the narrator imitates the mannerisms of a character, we call that mimicry. Number 2 is what we call tonal variation. Tonal variation means your voice will rise and fall to capture the mood of the narrative. If there is danger, you speak in low tones. For example, say, and the animals moved. They were so quiet because they were afraid of their lives. So that when there's that change of the tone of the voice, we call that tonal variation. So the change of the tone and pitch of the voice of the narrator to capture the mood of the narrative. So we call that tonal variation. Related to tonal variation is the pace and speed. So the narrator will varies the pace and speed of the narrative. By this, I mean that the narrator can make the narrative move faster or make it move slowly. You can tell this story very fast or very slowly. For example, you are giving a story about the chameleon. We know he moves slowly. So to capture the persona of the chameleon, the narrator may tell this story in a slow speed. But if you are telling a story about the hare, there is a very fast animal. And so to capture that personality of the hare, the narrator will tell that story very fast. So we say you are varying the pace and speed of the narrative, depending on the actions, on the events that are happening in the story. If you have many animals working together, we can have the story being said in a faster way than if we have an animal maybe that's dozing or is about to sleep. So the narrative is going to vary the speed of that narrative. Another feature of performance is what we call use of gestures. Gestures means the hand movements. Hand movements. Yes, and I've said these students, for one to actually enjoy as a narrative, what we call rendition of a narrative, you need to have an experience, the performance. So the narrator will use gestures. For example, we'll use the hands. If there are many animals, like what I'm demonstrating, you can use the hands this way to show many animals. If the animal was meek and humble, you can use this kind of gesture to show that the animal was meek and humble. So when you're performing a story, you're going to use your gestures. In other words, you're going to move your hands. We call that use of gestures. Another feature is called facial expression. Now, facial expressions to capture the mood of the narrative. Your face speaks volume. In fact, your face communicates much more than what you say by word of mouth. So in our story, the narrator will use the face to capture the mood of the story. For example, if the story has some sad feelings, you see the narrator putting on a sad face like this. But if the story is happy, the narrator will also be happy. You see the face beaming. The narrator is going to smile. It's going to smile to show that the story has a happy feeling. And if the character is shocked, you also see the narrator putting that face of showing that he is shocked. So you can change your face to capture the various moods in that narrative. We call that facial expression. Another device that is used by narrators, and I'll come to this side, the narrator might lengthen or shorten the narrative depending on the time available and the response of the audience. The response of the audience. If the audience is excited, is enthusiastic, is willing to listen to the narrator might lengthen the narrative. It means might make it longer than the usual time. Or if there is enough time to perform this narrative, the narrator might lengthen it. And how do lengthen a narrative? By repeating some sections. So we lengthen a narrative by repeating some sections especially the song. Remember we said that most narratives actually they include songs. So the narrator will repeat that song, and in the process is making this narrative longer. We also talked about involving your audience in the narration. So when we have a song in the narrative, you let your audience join the narration by singing along with the narrator. In that case, you are lengthening, or you can shorten the narrative. And how do you shorten a narrative? By now removing the song. In case there is a song in that narrative and it's repeated twice or thrice, you can sing it only once. So we shorten a narrative. We shorten a narrative by leaving out some sections that have been repeated. For example, the song. So that's a performance feature. The next, students, is what called use of allusions. What is an allusion? The narrator, an allusion is actually referring to somebody or something that is known by the audience. So referring to somebody or something that is known by the audience. The narrator might refer to a person who may be in that audience, might want to give an example using someone whom the audience actually knows. We call that allusion. Another performance feature is use of idiophones. And what are idiophones? Idiophones are sound devices. These are sound devices. Or a sound made by an object or a person. By this I mean, for example, if a character cries in a story, then the narrator will make that sound, woo-wee, woo-wee, such a sound. So that sound of wailing is called an idiophone. I'll come back to the center here. We look at more features. Number 9 is what called dramatic pause. What is dramatic pause? It means stopping the narrative temporarily for a short period of time to let the information sink. So while you are telling a story, you can pause for a short while to give your audience a minute to breathe in so that information can sink. So with the narrator stops or pauses for a short while to allow the information to sink into the audience. By this I mean audience is given a chance to try and digest the information, try and understand the information. So we call that dramatic pause. You stop for a short while to let the audience understand the information that you are giving. And lastly, we call rhetorical questions. Now, what is a rhetorical question? Rhetorical questions. A rhetorical question, students, is a question directed at someone that does not necessarily need an answer. So the narrator might ask the audience or a member of the audience a question that either has an obvious answer or does not need an answer. So this is a question that either has an obvious answer or does not need an answer. So the narrator asks a member of the audience. The narrator asks a member of the audience. For example, he might ask, do you know the chameleon? Who has ever seen a chameleon? Then the audience might respond or might not respond. So we call that a rhetorical question. So students, these are the major performance features I've said when the narrator is telling a story, he or she employs some features. We call that rendition of a narrative. It means telling the story, performance of a narrative. The narrator is going to employ some features to make the performance interesting, to make it lively. And I've said one of them is mimicry, which means imitating the mannerisms of the characters. You can use tone variation, where you vary the pitch of your voice. You can vary the pace and speed of the narrative. You can also use gestures, which are hand movements. You can also change your face to capture the mood of that narrative. If it has a sad mood, then you're going to put on a sad face. If it has a happy mood, you're going to have a happy face. The narrator can also lengthen or shorten the narrative depending on the time that's available. You can also use allusions, in this case referring to people in the audience. And then you can also use idiophones. And then you have also said you can use dramatic pause. And lastly, rhetorical questions. So with that, students, that will mark the end of today's lesson. And in the future, in the next lesson, we shall look at various examples of the types of narratives that you have already mentioned. Until next time, bye-bye and God bless you.